Most people can recognize the Great Pyramid in a single second. It is one of the most famous shapes on Earth. But that familiarity hides something strange. The more closely historians, engineers, and archaeologists study the pyramids, the less simple they seem. We know who commissioned the Great Pyramid. We know roughly when it was built. We know the civilization that surrounded it. And yet some of its most basic questions still refuse to die. How was a structure of that scale raised with such precision more than 4,000 years ago? Why do some internal spaces seem to serve no obvious practical purpose? And why do new scans still find hidden features inside a monument that has been studied for centuries? The real mystery of the pyramids is not that they appeared out of nowhere. It is that the oldest explanations are too simple, the wildest explanations are too lazy, and the truth in the middle is still difficult enough to humble modern experts. The Great Pyramid at Giza was built during the reign of Khufu, around the 26th century BCE. In its original form, it stood about 146 meters high, covered in polished white casing stones that would have caught the sun and turned the monument into something almost blinding. It was not standing alone in empty sand. It was part of a much larger sacred landscape, connected to temples, causeways, satellite pyramids, and boat pits. But even when we place it back inside its world, the sheer scale remains hard to absorb. The monument was made from millions of blocks. Many were manageable limestone pieces, but some of the granite beams placed high inside the structure weighed tens of tons. This is where the pyramid begins to stop feeling like a monument and starts feeling like a problem. It is not only the size. It is the size combined with the accuracy. One of the most unsettling details is the alignment. The Great Pyramid is oriented toward true north with astonishing precision, close enough that even modern observers still pause when they compare its layout to the tools supposedly available at the time. Ancient Egyptian skywatching was sophisticated, and scholars have proposed several credible methods for how builders could have established cardinal directions by observing stars or shadows. None of that is impossible. In fact, that is the point. The most serious mystery is not that the Egyptians were incapable. It is that they were capable enough to achieve results so exact that every missing step in the process feels louder. We can describe the broad method. We can imagine teams of trained surveyors, cords, sightlines, posts, and repeated checks. But when people stand at Giza and see the finished result, what bothers them is that there is almost no visible hesitation in the stone. The margin for error feels smaller than the age of the monument should allow. Then there is the question almost everyone asks first. How were the stones moved? Popular culture loves to reduce the debate to a single dramatic image, as if there must have been one master trick that explains everything. In reality, the answer was probably a chain of solutions rather than a single miracle. Quarrying, shaping, dragging, levering, hauling, and lifting may all have relied on different techniques depending on the stone and the stage of construction. There is strong evidence that Egyptians used sledges and labor teams. There is also experimental support for the idea that wetting sand in front of a sledge could reduce drag and make transport more efficient. That helps. It matters. But it does not completely settle the matter, because transporting a block across prepared ground is not the same as guiding thousands of blocks up a rising monument while preserving alignment and pace. The old textbook image of a giant straight ramp has its own problems. A ramp long and gentle enough to reach the upper levels of the Great Pyramid might have required a volume of materials so enormous that the ramp itself begins to rival the pyramid. That has pushed researchers toward more complex possibilities. Some have argued for zigzagging external ramps hugging the sides. Others have proposed spiral ramps or internal ramp systems hidden within the structure. One of the most famous modern theories imagines a ramp built inside the pyramid's outer shell, turning as the monument rose. This theory is attractive because it reduces the need for one huge exterior ramp and could explain some puzzling features. But it is still debated. It fits certain observations, then raises new questions of its own. That pattern appears again and again in pyramid studies. A theory solves one problem, then exposes another. The monument keeps refusing to become simple. The granite used in key internal chambers makes the mystery feel even heavier. Much of that granite came from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers south of Giza. That means some of the most difficult stones were not merely dragged a short distance from a nearby quarry. They had to be quarried far away, transported along the Nile, unloaded, and then maneuvered into exact positions inside a structure that was growing more demanding as it rose. The huge granite beams above the king's chamber are especially haunting. They were placed high in the pyramid as part of a system designed to relieve pressure from the chamber below. In other words, the builders were not just stacking stone. They were engineering load management deep inside an enormous mass. They understood that weight could destroy a chamber if it was not redirected. That does not sound like blind trial and error. It sounds like planning sophisticated enough to leave modern visitors wondering how much else was understood and then forgotten. This is where the inside of the Great Pyramid becomes almost more mysterious than the outside. From the outside, it is a geometric command. From the inside, it feels like a conversation we arrived too late to hear. There is the descending passage, the ascending passage, the grand gallery, the so-called Queen's Chamber, the King's Chamber, and the unfinished subterranean chamber cut into the bedrock. The very naming of these spaces reveals how incomplete our understanding still is. The Queen's Chamber likely had nothing to do with a queen. The King's Chamber was probably not simply a room for a coffin in the casual sense people imagine. The subterranean chamber looks almost abandoned, or perhaps repurposed in design. The Grand Gallery remains one of the strangest spaces in ancient architecture, both elegant and oddly severe, as if it were designed to do more than simply allow movement. Even when archaeologists map the passages precisely, function does not always reveal itself. The so-called air shafts only deepen the feeling that the pyramid is withholding meaning. Narrow shafts extend from the king's chamber to the outer surface, while those from the queen's chamber stop before breaking through. They are often called ventilation shafts, but that label may be more convenient than accurate. Some researchers think they had symbolic importance, perhaps linked to stars or the king's spiritual ascent. Others focus on engineering or ritual interpretations. In the 1990s, robotic exploration of one of the Queen's chamber shafts found a small blocking stone with copper fittings. It quickly became famous as a kind of stone door, and the discovery reignited public fascination. Later exploration passed beyond it and found another blocking stone farther in. That does not prove hidden treasure or lost technology. But it does prove something more unsettling for scholars. The monument still contains spaces and barriers whose exact purpose remains unclear. And then, in the 21st century, modern scanning technology managed to make one of the oldest monuments on Earth mysterious again. The Scan Pyramids project used non-invasive methods, including muon detection, to look through the stone. In 2017, the team announced evidence for a large void above the Grand Gallery. That news traveled around the world because it sounded like the pyramid had produced a fresh secret after thousands of years. The void was not a rumor invented by tourists. It was a measured anomaly large enough to demand attention. But what is it? An empty chamber. A relieving space. A construction cavity. A structural feature. Even now, the answer is not settled. And that is exactly why the finding matters so much. It reminded everyone that the Great Pyramid is not a dead question. It is an old question with new instruments pointed at it. There is another reason the pyramids keep people in suspense. They exist in the uncomfortable space between abundant evidence and missing evidence. We do have meaningful discoveries. The Diary of Mirror, found at Wadi al-Jarf, records the movement of limestone during Khufu's reign and is one of the most valuable written glimpses into Pyramid-age logistics ever discovered. Worker cemeteries and settlements near Giza show that the builders were not simply faceless slaves in chains, as older myths once suggested, but organized laborers supported by a state system with food, housing, and hierarchy. Quarry marks, masonry traces, and tool evidence all point toward a human process that was disciplined rather than magical. Yet for all that, we still do not possess a neat surviving master blueprint that answers the biggest practical questions step by step. The record illuminates the edges of the process. It does not walk us cleanly through the center. That missing center is where exaggeration rushes in. Once people hear that experts still debate ramps, chambers, and alignment, they leap to their favorite conclusion. For some, the answer must be extraterrestrial intervention. For others, it must be a vanished super-civilization with advanced machines erased from history. Those ideas survive because they offer emotional closure. They replace a complicated human achievement with a dramatic secret. But the strongest evidence still points in a different direction. The ancient Egyptians had the labor force, the state power, the river transport, the administrative capacity, and the cultural motivation to build on a scale that still shocks us. The true mystery is not whether humans built the pyramids. It is how humans, working within that exact civilization and that exact time, combined observation, organization, and engineering so effectively that many of the final steps remain hard to reconstruct. In some ways, the polished casing stones tell that story better than the missing stones inside. Most of the smooth outer casing is gone today, stripped away over centuries or lost through earthquakes and reuse. What remains is the rougher stepped core, and that has shaped modern imagination. People think of the pyramids as giant staircases of weathered blocks. But in antiquity, the Great Pyramid would have looked far more precise and almost unreal, with a gleaming white surface and a capstone crowning the summit. That lost exterior matters because it reminds us that we are not studying the monument in its original condition. We are studying something partly dismantled, partly eroded, and partly robbed of context. Every missing layer invites false certainty. It is easy to forget that some of what looks crude today was once refined almost beyond belief. There is also the problem of sound, space, and bodily experience. People who enter the Great Pyramid often describe its interior as oppressive, uncanny, and strangely resonant. The passages feel deliberate in ways that are hard to reduce to simple utility. Some researchers have explored the acoustics of the King's Chamber and the Grand Gallery, arguing that resonance may have played a role in ritual experience or simply in how the structure channels sound. These theories should be treated carefully. Not every eerie sensation reveals a hidden design principle. But the fact that such questions even arise shows how far the pyramid still escapes ordinary architectural categories. A modern building can usually explain itself. A stair is a stair. A corridor is a corridor. The Great Pyramid contains spaces whose practical purpose may overlap with ritual, symbolism, engineering, and display so tightly that modern categories keep slipping off. Astronomy adds another layer. Ancient Egyptians watched the sky closely, and funerary belief was deeply entangled with celestial order. The pyramid's orientation, the possible stellar significance of shafts, and the broader religious importance of solar and circumpolar symbolism make the heavens impossible to ignore. Some popular claims go too far, forcing precise star maps onto monuments that do not need such exaggeration. But the broader connection is real enough. The pyramid is not just a pile of stone. It is a machine of kingship, death, resurrection, and cosmic order built by people who saw the sky as part of political and sacred reality. When modern viewers ask only how the stones were moved, they may miss the deeper point. The monument was meant to work symbolically as much as physically. And that dual purpose may be why some design choices still seem strange to purely modern engineering eyes. Even the logistics of labor raise mysteries that are more impressive than sensational. How do you feed, organize, and direct thousands of workers over years or decades while maintaining consistency? How do you coordinate quarrying, shipping, hauling, shaping, measuring, and placement at a pace that keeps the whole project moving? Monumental construction on this scale is not just a matter of strength. It is administration. It is calendars, supply lines, chain of command, religious timing, river cycles, and political stability. In that sense, the Great Pyramid is also an archive of invisible decisions. The blocks are visible. The bureaucracy that made them move is mostly gone. When people feel stunned by the monument, they are often reacting not only to stone, but to the vanished system of control behind it. The pyramid is the fossil of an organization powerful enough to turn an idea into geometry. And still, one of the most frustrating facts is how many details remain ordinary on their own and extraordinary in combination. We can understand river transport. We can understand sledges. We can understand surveying by stars. We can understand labor teams and ramps. None of those things are impossible individually. The Great Pyramid becomes mysterious when they all have to work together at a level where mistakes compound quickly, and yet the final result stays astonishingly clean. It is the same feeling a modern engineer might have when looking at a finished system without access to the drafts, failed prototypes, field corrections, and training manuals that made it possible. The final object looks too sure of itself. It hides the improvisation, and because it hides the improvisation, modern observers start imagining impossibilities. There are secrets outside the Great Pyramid as well. Nearby pyramids at Giza and elsewhere in Egypt show development, experimentation, and occasional failure. The bent pyramid at Dahshur changes angle mid-construction, almost like a visible record of a correction. The Red Pyramid presents a more successful evolution. These monuments matter because they reveal that pyramid building was not a single miracle performed once. It was a tradition that developed, improved, and learned. That should make the Great Pyramid less mysterious. In a way, it does. It roots the monument within a historical process. But it also sharpens the mystery by showing how quickly Egyptian builders refined their approach. The Great Pyramid appears not as an isolated impossibility, but as the peak of a learning curve that still feels astonishingly steep. Modern archaeology has become better at rejecting false drama, yet the pyramids keep producing a more durable form of suspense. It is the suspense of incomplete clarity. We know enough to dismiss fantasy, but not enough to silence wonder. We know the builders were human, but their execution still feels almost excessive in its confidence. We know many of the broad methods, but not every sequence. We know there are symbolic layers, but not how each architectural choice maps onto ritual meaning. We know the monument has been opened, robbed, restored, scanned, and measured, yet it can still surprise us with a void no one expected. This is rare. Most ancient monuments grow less mysterious as evidence accumulates. The Great Pyramid often grows more specific without becoming less uncanny. That tension is part of why the pyramid has survived not only as architecture, but as an argument. Every generation projects something onto it. Empire, occultism, religion, national identity, lost wisdom, mathematical obsession, fringe science, colonial fantasy, scientific caution, and tourist awe have all clung to its stones. The monument has been forced to carry theories it never asked for. But beneath those projections, the real structure remains stubborn. It does not need aliens to be extraordinary. It does not need supernatural curses to feel intimidating. It only needs to remain what it already is, a monument built by ancient people whose skill, organization, and symbolic ambition were so intense that modern observers still struggle to hold the whole achievement in one explanation. Perhaps the strangest part is that some of the best evidence is almost too mundane to satisfy the imagination. A papyrus logbook. Tool marks. Worker graves. Quarry traces. Tiny alignment deviations. Transport experiments using wet sand. These are not glamorous. They do not explode like movie revelations. Yet they are exactly the kind of clues historians trust most. And even with those clues, there is still enough uncertainty left over to keep the larger mystery alive. That is why debates over the pyramids rarely end. They shrink, change shape, and become more technical, but they do not disappear. One question gets answered and another becomes sharper. The monument keeps transforming broad mystery into narrower mystery, and narrower mystery into even deeper respect. The hidden spaces are where this feeling becomes most intense. A sealed shaft. A blocking stone with copper fittings. A void over a gallery. A chamber whose purpose resists a simple label. These features matter not because they guarantee some sensational discovery tomorrow, but because they remind us that the interior logic of the pyramid is not fully transparent. We are still reading a structure that was never built to explain itself to outsiders. It was built for kingship, divinity, death, and eternity. If parts of it seem silent to us, that silence may be part of the point. The pyramid was designed to endure, not to confess. So why do pyramid secrets still puzzle scientists after thousands of years? Because the monument sits at the crossroads of physics, religion, labor, politics, astronomy, and loss. Because enough of the evidence survived to prove a great deal, but not enough survived to make the whole story easy. Because later destruction stripped away important clues. Because the inside remains more complex than the outside suggests. Because modern tools can now see anomalies that older explorers never could. And because every responsible answer still ends with one uncomfortable phrase. We know a lot. We do not know everything. That is the real power of the pyramids. They do not survive as mysteries because history failed. They survive as mysteries because history succeeded just enough to show us how remarkable the builders really were. The Great Pyramid is not a blank space in the record. It is a masterpiece with missing instructions. And maybe that is why it still grips the modern mind more than almost any other monument on Earth. It is old enough to feel mythic, solid enough to feel undeniable, and unresolved enough to keep asking one final question. If this is what ancient builders could achieve with stone, stars, state power, and patience, how much of their method did they understand in detail that we have only partially recovered? Perhaps the most honest ending is also the most haunting one. The pyramids are not fully unsolved. That would be too simple. But they are not fully solved either. They remain suspended in that narrow and fascinating space where evidence is real, wonder is justified, and certainty keeps breaking apart at the edges. That is why every new scan, every new theory, every new excavation, and every new argument still matters. Somewhere between the polished casing stones that once flashed in the sun and the hidden voids that still sit in darkness, one missing piece of the story remains out of reach. And until that piece is found, the Great Pyramid will keep doing what it has done for millennia. It will stand still, say nothing, and continue to outlast every explanation we try to place around it. Subscribe to Shadow Archive for more dark history documentaries.